Hi everybody, it's Dr. Bob back here at the Vitality Project. Well, I went to Plan B here. I have a tablet, and so I opened it in hopes that I could get to the chat function, and for whatever reason, I'm being denied access to it from where I sit, so I apologize for that. I'm going to go ahead and share a few ideas with you, and I welcome you to write chat. Write responses or questions that you might have regarding what I talk about. Put that in the chat function and the chat box, and I'll respond to it later. Okay, my apologies for that. I'm usually with my laptop computer, and it may be the fact that I'm not using it that's led to this particular issue. So what we were talking about is that our topic for tonight is stress management, and specifically breaking bad habits via stress management. And what I wanted to do is just review what we've talked about in our last couple of Facebook Live events, and then bring in some new material for you to chew on, to reflect on tonight. We started off by talking about addiction, and we're talking about addiction in terms of everyday bad habits that we all have. And one of the points I made is that the word addiction itself, it opens it up a lot if we understand the root meaning of the word addiction. It comes from the Latin term addictus, which simply means slave. And so to be addicted is to be enslaved. I see my partner Jason was able to join. Jason, it's good to see you. For whatever reason on my tablet, Jason, I'm not able to get to the chat function. I don't know why it won't open up here in the Facebook Live event. And so if you have an opportunity to respond to individuals that write in, I encourage you to do that. I tried several different pathways, and so we're using my tablet now, but still no chat. So if addictus is understood as the root of addiction, and it means, literally addiction means enslavement, then it begins to open up something where we can look at addiction much more universally than we typically do. I think we typically assign addiction to severe addiction to alcohol and other drugs, and that's certainly pertinent. But that only applies to 1 out of 4 of us in America over the age of 12 right now are addicted to substance, if you include alcohol, nicotine, and then the other psychoactive drugs that are commonly used and abused. But if you open this up then to look at addiction as enslavement, now you cover the 90% of Americans who say that they have at least one behavioral addiction right now, one behavioral enslavement. So how do we define addiction more technically? We're getting kind of the idea, the root meaning of it. Well, the idea of addiction is simply when I do something that fouls me up in my life and I can't stop it. That's not a really technical definition, but that's very close to the technical definition that physicians and specialists in addiction use. Doing something that fouls me up and I cannot stop it. In our just previous podcast, we talked about why would we do something that fouls us up? Well, it turns out that there's a very close connection between many of the behaviors or bad habits that we have and our bodies and brains response to stress. And just by way of quick review, and I encourage you to go back and take a look at those Facebook Live events, they're here in this feed right here, is that we talked about how it is that in the brain there are two stress hormones. Primarily there are adrenaline. Most of us know about adrenaline. The other one is less commonly known, cortisol. So adrenaline and cortisol are the two most common stress hormones, and those will spike upward when we get stressed out. They do every time when you get stressed, and the body and the brain can't sustain that kind of elevation or spike in stress hormones. And so one of the quickest ways to reduce stress in the body is to introduce dopamine. We have dopamine; it's a neurotransmitter. It's in our body and our brains, but there are certain behaviors and certain substances that will lead to a dopamine spike. And as dopamine goes up, adrenaline and cortisol go down. So just briefly summarize, that's kind of the math of what happens in terms of our turning to addictive substances and addictive behaviors, because they're all associated with elevating the reward neurotransmitter, which is dopamine. And so you begin to see the close connection between stress on the one hand, remember elevated cortisol and adrenaline. And addictive behaviors, remember the attempt to try to elevate dopamine in our bodies and our brains, and how we can get locked into a cycle then. Now, so when we talk about, I want to welcome those that have joined. Jason, it's good to see you. Jerome, Jamsari, Tracy, Robert, great to see you, brother. Great to see you, Robert. I appreciate your support, Robert. Hope that you're doing well. I want to welcome James Allen, too. Thank you for joining. If we talk about stress management and breaking bad habits, it's easy, especially around this time of the year. We just got out of the first month of the year of 2020. Most of us make New Year's resolutions starting each year, and you probably did for this year as well. If there's one key insight I could offer before we even say anything more about breaking bad habits, it would be careful about shaming yourself when it comes to changing habits that you want to change. And so whether we talk about old habits that have not served you, or we talk about active forms of behavioral addiction, whatever it might be, is that to shame ourselves is self-defeating. And we talked about this a bit last time, is that if you think about it, if what I'm trying to do with my bad habits, with my attempts at reducing stress through various addictive behaviors, if what I'm trying to do is reduce stress, and then what I'm adding to that that process is I'm trying to stop an addictive behavior, and then I shame myself when I don't succeed in doing that, I'm actually pouring gasoline on the fire, because of the human emotions of anger, fear, sadness. By far the one that stimulates the highest release of stress hormones, we're back to stress, is shame. So to state it simply, if I beat myself up in the process of trying to break old bad habits and establish new good ones, it's a classic example of kind of one step forward and two steps backwards. Because what I'm doing in essence, as I shame myself, is creating more stress, and that's going to trigger the wish for what? More dopamine. And how do I get more dopamine? Well, that's back to our bad habits. I was in a group this week at one of the local treatment centers, and I got there a little bit early, and the therapist who was leading the group as I got there invited me to join the group just as a listener, and I was happy to do that. And she was reviewing with the clients in this particular treatment center what kinds of things do they do to reduce or manage their stress. And she had one of these whiteboards with a magic marker, and just started writing down the list of how people manage stress. These are all people in early recovery from severe addiction to drugs. And it was amazing. The group generated very quickly at least a dozen different ways of managing stress that covered a whole broad area. I want to ask you to think about this for yourself. And if you have a piece of paper in front of you, or if you can just focus on this and kind of get it in the front of your mind, what kinds of things do you do that are non-addictive that reduce stress? Because this is going to be one of the keys. If I want to break bad habits, particularly those that represent the addictive component of doing something that's actually fouling me up in my life and I can't seem to stop, if I want to break that, I need to, among other things, I need to come up with some effective strategies for managing stress. And so I'd love for you to think about this. If I was able to get my chat function up and running, I would actually respond to you right now in real time. I'll respond to you later, but I'd be happy for you to share what kinds of things do you do to manage stress. Let me give you a little boost here. You know, we've been talking here in our Facebook Live events about a holistic approach to living our lives. That includes a holistic approach to addressing whatever addictive behaviors, whatever bad habits we have in our lives, and replacing those with recovery-oriented behaviors. And what do we want to recover? Well, we've talked about this. We want to recover our potential. In the conversation that we have here at the Vitality Project, all of us want full, vital lives, hence the Vitality Project. So a way to think about approaching this question holistically goes like this. What kinds of things can I use to reduce stress physically? That would be the body. For example, exercise. Possibly muscle relaxation or yoga. Okay, that's one. We're looking at a holistic perspective. That's body. How about mind? What kinds of things can I do to reduce stress mentally and emotionally? That's the realm of mind. And in fact, if I think about this the other day, the list that I looked at on the board, people included on that list, talking to a friend. In other words, sharing your concerns or your worries or your stress with another person will reduce stress for most people, especially if the listener is an effective listener. It makes a huge difference. So that would be at the mental level. And then body, mind. Okay, then body, mind, spirit. What kinds of things can I do spiritually to help to manage and reduce my stress? This would enter in, for any of you, whatever it is that you do. I meditate regularly. You might pray. I do also pray. Meditation, prayer, devotional reading, going to church, going to religious services. Any of these things serve as possible resources. I just saw some new people came on here. It's actually popping up so I can see who's watching. Rudy, I want to welcome you. Sam, thank you for joining. Donovan, great to have you here. And you've just seen an announcement that my partner Jason has put up here for the Vitality Project. We'll talk more about that as we go along. We can take a look at that later. So we're talking about ways of managing my stress. How do I manage my stress physically? How do I manage it mentally and emotionally? How do I manage my stress spiritually? I include two other things, two other dimensions or parts of ourselves in a holistic perspective: body, mind, spirit, soul. And by soul, I mean, well, I'm going to a jazz concert tonight. In fact, I'm dressed for it. This is a jazz label I'm wearing on my t-shirt. It's ECM Records out of Germany, and the artist I'm going to go see record for ECM Records. So what do we do to stimulate and nurture creativity in our lives? And in fact, that afternoon where I saw that the group was listing resources for stress management, I think the very first one that somebody put up there was listening to music. When I ask in groups, how many of you listen to music to manage your emotions, manage your stress, it'll be everyone. There will be no exception. It's just virtually universal. And it may be as many different styles. In fact, I've gone around groups before and I've asked, what kinds of style, what's your favorite style of music? And we'll go around a group of 20 or 25 members, and there'll be the whole range of possible musics that people listen to, which is very, very cool to me. But what's the universal kind of deeper structure is that music is healing, and listening to it can be really settling for people in terms of stress. And so that's a big one. I'm a musician myself. I drum. And so drumming for me for my entire life has been a major, major resource in terms of stress management. And maybe you have access to other art forms or other creative expressions. Virtually anything that you do that you know that feeds and nourishes your soul non-addictively would classify as stress management in this dimension of soul. Welcome to Sharon. Welcome to Kathy. Thank you both for joining us here. We're talking about stress management and how we can manage stress, kind of all cylinders, all parts of our being. So we've talked about body, mind, spirit, soul. I also include shadow in this kind of 5-point holistic view. And how I understand shadow, it relates to what I said earlier, is that one of the tricky things to do when you're working on reducing stress and changing negative or bad habits is to not beat yourself up, because that's really, like I said, 2 steps backwards. And when I think of shadow, I think of how this goes is that it means, I think how we handle stress, we have to be very careful about how we go about doing that, because we can actually create more stress by our mindset about going through that. For example, let's say that I do, and I meditate, here's another example. I work out regularly. Let's say that I don't work out someday and beat myself up for not working out. You can see right away that there's a shadow component to anything, even that's good, like exercise. It has a lot to do with how I go about managing it when I do exercise and also when I don't exercise. And so this piece of shadow is learning how to kind of forgive ourselves for being human. And I think this takes a lot of skill. I think oftentimes this is facilitated by working with a coach or a therapist. It's right at the heart of what we're doing in the Vitality Project. We have an online membership site. You can see the link here. My partner Jason has put it up here. And a lot of what we're doing is creating a community that's safe, it's confidential, and it's compassionate. I do every morning I do a video post to the Vitality Project, to the membership page, and we're in a series right now on treating ourselves with curiosity and kindness. If I stumble, can I look at that with curiosity, like what was that about? And can I also remember to be kind to myself rather than mean to myself? I want to pause for a second and welcome Thomas. Thanks for joining. Steve, Christopher, thank you. Jerry, thank you for being here. Appreciate very much you guys showing up. We've been talking about how to manage stress across 5 different dimensions of our lives. And these are universal dimensions: body, mind, spirit, soul, and shadow. So I'd love for you to share with me. You can do it here. You can do it on the Facebook page right here at Vitality Project. You can also go to my personal page, which is Robert Weathers, and just share with me ideas that you have for how you manage stress non-addictively. All of us at various times have gotten caught or enslaved by our ways of managing stress, and that would be under the umbrella of addictive behaviors. And so we have to get creative here, and I suspect that we have a lot of creativity in our audience. Jason has just written to thank all of you for joining us, and we do really appreciate it. Let me just share an idea with you as we wrap up for today. I hope that you will write to me in the chat box how you manage stress, and we'll continue moving forward. But I've got an idea for you. I talked about it earlier today with Jason. Something that I want to do and to incorporate this into our next Facebook Live events, and we have one scheduled tomorrow afternoon. I'd like to invite any of you that would like to interact with me live, I mean literally live, where we're talking here in the Facebook Live event. If you're interested in, for example, asking me a question, and it can be related to anything having to do with addiction or recovery, including what we talked about today, managing stress and breaking bad habits. I welcome you to do that. And my thought is this: if you're interested, just let me know. You can write me through this Facebook page right here. Just send me a note. And what we'll do is we'll schedule a 10-minute or so event soon where it'll just be you and me in dialogue online. I'd like very much to do this, and so I really do loved the interaction that comes live, and I think virtually any comment or question can be folded in a positive way into what we're trying to create here at the Vitality Project, which is an online recovery support community. It's meant to be a service to anybody who's in recovery from any kind of addictive behavior. It's also meant to be supportive for anybody who's a loved one of someone who's in recovery from an addictive behavior. And we've defined addiction here tonight, as we have recently, as any behavior that enslaves us, whether it's to a substance or to some kind of impulsive or compulsive behavior that we can't seem to stop. And I hope that you're with me in terms of the logic of addiction is that when we get stressed out, we need to reduce the stress. And for many of us, we develop, sometimes very early on in our lives, ways of coping with stress, which are understandable, but they're self-defeating. And so what we want to do is replace those bad habits with positive habits, and stress management's right at the top of the heap. I sometimes say this, that stress is public enemy number 1 when it comes to addiction recovery and to being able to sustain it. So we're trying to be very practical here in our conversations. I want to thank all of you for joining. Mark, thanks for joining. Tomorrow night, thank you, Jason. Tomorrow night, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I'm in California. 6 p.m. tomorrow evening. And if you have interest in dialoguing with me, just drop me a note and we'll make it happen, okay? Maybe as soon as tomorrow. You guys have a good evening. I appreciate you joining me very much. Great to see you. More to follow, okay, here at the Vitality Project. Take care.